What happens when a man, blinded by ambition, kicks his pregnant wife out into the cold, believing she is nothing? Peter Adler thought he was trading up, securing his future by discarding his poor wife, Eleanor. He told her she was worthless. He told her she'd be nothing without him. He was wrong. Because 5 years later, at the biggest party of his life, a knock comes on the door. He's about to be introduced to the new owner of his mansion, and he already knows her name. This isn't a story about revenge, it's a story about a reckoning. The rain was cold, a merciless, driving chill that defined that November in Chicago, but it was nothing compared to the ice in Peter Adler's voice. You're an embarrassment, Eleanor. A walking, talking liability. Eleanor, 5 months pregnant, couldn't stop her hands from shaking. She wasn't shaking from the cold, not yet. She was shaking from the absolute, sterile hatred radiating from the man she had loved since he was a scrappy business school intern, and she was the barista who always remembered his complicated order. "Peter, please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "It's the gala. I just spilled some wine. It was an accident." An accident? The voice didn't come from Peter. It was his mother, Genevieve Adler, a woman carved from expensive marble and disdain. She glided into the foyer of their sprawling Lincoln Park mansion, her silver dress glittering. "You tripped over your own feet and dumped a tray of Cabernet on Robert Sterling. The Robert Sterling, the man whose company is about to merge with our son's." "I'm pregnant, Genevieve. My balance is off." "That," Genevieve said, her voice dropping to a venomous hiss, "is the core of the problem, isn't it?" Peter wouldn't look at her. He was busy staring at his reflection in the hall mirror, adjusting the cuffs of his $5,000 Tom Ford tuxedo. He was the picture of new money success, the VP of a rapidly expanding private equity firm, and Eleanor, with her department store maternity dress, which she'd bought on sale, and her simple, kind face, was a stain on that picture. She came from nothing, a trailer park in Indiana. Her parents were gone, and her only inheritance was a mountain of medical debt and a box of old photographs. Peter had once called her his grounding force. Now, she was just gravity pulling him down. "Peter," she pleaded, turning to him. "It's just a dress." He laughed it off. "He laughed, Eleanor," Peter finally snapped, turning on her. His blue eyes, which she used to think were as warm as the Mediterranean, were now Arctic. He laughed the way a lion laughs at a wounded gazelle. "I just spent 6 months convincing the Sterlings that I am their equal, that our family is one they should want to be tied to. And you show up looking like that." "Like what?" she asked, tears welling. "Like your poor," Genevieve supplied, stepping forward. "Because you are, dear. You can't polish a... well, you know the expression." "Get your coat," Peter said, his voice flat and dead. "What?" "Peter, no, we can't go. We're the hosts. I'll apologize again." "No, we aren't going anywhere. You are." He walked to the imposing front door and pulled it open. The windy, wet Chicago night howled into the pristine foyer, blowing a spatter of rain onto the polished floor. Eleanor's blood ran cold. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about this," he said, pulling a slim envelope from his jacket pocket. "Our lawyer, Silas, drew this up. It's a separation agreement. It's very generous. It gives you $10,000 for your troubles." Eleanor's hand went to her stomach. The baby kicked, a tiny, fluttering reassurance that was suddenly the only real thing in the world. "A separation. Peter, I'm carrying your child." "A problem, as I said," Genevieve purred. "A child complicates the merger. Isabella Sterling, Robert's daughter." She's not the type to tolerate baggage. The name hit Eleanor like a physical blow. Isabella Sterling, the stunning, blonde, Ice Queen heiress she'd seen Peter laughing with at company events, the woman he'd sworn was just a business contact. You're doing this for her? Eleanor's whisper was barely audible. You're throwing us out. For her? I'm securing my future, Eleanor, Peter said, his face a mask of impatience. This firm, this life, it's not for people like you. You were a phase, a sweet, naive mistake. Now the mistake is over. But my things, where will I go? I had your things packed, Genevieve said, gesturing to a single medium-sized suitcase standing by the stairs. The staff was efficient. As for where you'll go, I hear those shelters are surprisingly clean these days. Or you could go back to, where was it? Gary? Muncie? One of those dreadful little towns. The $10,000 check was inside the envelope, a severance package, for 5 years of her life, for loving him, for supporting him when he was a nobody, for carrying his child. I won't sign this, Eleanor said, a spark of fight igniting through the shock. It doesn't matter if you do or not, Peter said with a shrug. Silas is filing for divorce tomorrow. Grounds of, irreconcilable differences. He'll serve you papers at whatever hovel you land in. Take the check, Eleanor. It's the last cent you'll ever get from me. He tossed the envelope onto the floor. It landed with a soft thud on the wet patch of rain. Now get out, he said, his voice final. Peter, please! She lunged for him, grabbing his arm. Don't do this! Think about the baby. Our baby! His reaction was immediate and violent. He recoiled, shoving her away. Don't touch me! The shove was harder than he intended, or perhaps exactly as hard as he intended. Eleanor, her balance already precarious, stumbled backward. Her heel caught on the edge of the plush Persian rug. She fell, hard, against the foyer's marble-topped console table. The crystal vase on it wobbled and crashed to the floor, shattering into 1,000 pieces alongside her dignity. She cried out, a sharp gasp of pain and fear, clutching her stomach. For a single, frozen moment, Peter looked scared. He looked at her, then at his mother. Genevieve's face didn't flicker. Get up, Eleanor. You're not damaged, and you're ruining the ambience. The Sterlings will be here in 10 minutes. Peter's moment of humanity vanished, replaced by the mask of ambition. He looked down at his wife, on the floor, surrounded by shattered glass and water, clutching their unborn child. He pointed to the door. Security will be here in 60 seconds if you're not on the other side of that door. Don't make this uglier than it already is. Sobbing, shaking, Eleanor used the wall to pull herself to her feet. The pain in her side was sharp, but the pain in her heart was a black hole. She looked at Peter, the man she'd promised to love in sickness and in health. He was just a stranger in a tuxedo. She picked up her single suitcase. She didn't look at the check on the floor. She left it there, on the rain-soaked marble. She walked out of the door, her thin coat offering no protection against the stinging rain. The massive oak door of the mansion shut behind her with a sound of utter, damning finality. A click of a lock. Eleanor Adler was homeless, pregnant, and penniless. She stood on the curb, the rain plastering her hair to her face, and watched as a black limousine pulled up. Robert and Isabella Sterling, laughing and radiant, stepped out. Peter and Genevieve were already at the door, wreathed in smiles, to welcome them in. The next 6 months were a blur of humiliation, hunger, and a terror so profound, Eleanor thought it would swallow her whole. The $10,000 check she had refused to pick up was a ghost. She had less than $20 in her purse. Peter, with cruel efficiency, had already frozen their joint bank account, the account into which she had, for 5 years, deposited her own paychecks from the cafe, money he'd called our little fun fund. She spent 2 nights in a bus station, shivering, clutching her stomach, pretending to wait for a bus that would never come. She ate saltine crackers from a vending machine. On the 3rd day, a kind-faced security guard gently told her she couldn't stay. He pointed her toward a women's shelter in the city's less-than-charitable West Loop. The St. Jude's shelter for women was loud, smelled of bleach and boiled potatoes, and was terrifyingly full. But it was warm. It was safe. Eleanor, swallowing the jagged shards of her pride, gave a false name, Ella Vance, and accepted a cot in a room with 5 other women. Pregnancy made her vulnerable, but it also made her a priority. The shelter's overworked social worker, a woman named Maria, got her a spot in a transitional housing program. It was a single room in a rundown building, but it had a lock on the door and a hot plate. Eleanor's new life was a monotonous schedule of survival. She took the bus to a prenatal clinic, standing in line for hours for a 5-minute checkup. She applied for food stamps. She searched for work, but who was hiring a visibly pregnant woman with no references and no fixed address? She'd listed her old cafe on applications, but she suspected one call to Genevieve's people had blacklisted her. The loneliness was a physical weight. She had no one. Her parents were gone. The few friends she'd had were Peter's friends now, and they'd all watched, silent, as Genevieve Adler had systematically isolated her over the years. One day, shuffling down a street with a bag of day-old bread from a local pantry, she saw a newspaper. On the front of the business section was Peter. He was smiling, his arm around Isabella Sterling. The headline read, "Adler-Sterling Merger, Complete, a New Chicago Power Couple." Eleanor threw up in a trash can. The baby wasn't baggage to be tolerated. It was a complication to the merger. With Eleanor gone, the merger was now a marriage. The engagement was official. That was the day Eleanor's sorrow curdled. It didn't disappear, but it crystallized. It hardened into something else. Resolve. She was no longer just surviving for herself. She was surviving for the tiny, innocent life inside her. The life he had discarded. She found a job. It was under the table, cash at the end of the day. A tiny, struggling Greek diner called the Acropolis was run by an elderly, sharp-witted woman named Elena Petrov. Mrs. Petrov had seen it all and was impressed by nothing. "You're pregnant," Mrs. Petrov observed, not unkindly, when Eleanor asked for a job washing dishes. "I am," Eleanor said, her voice steady. "But I'm not sick. I'm strong, and I won't be late. Not ever." Mrs. Petrov looked at Eleanor's hands, raw from the cold, and the deep, haunted circles under her eyes. She saw the steel beneath the exhaustion. "You eat here. Anything you want," Mrs. Petrov said. $40 a day, in your pocket. You start now." Eleanor washed dishes for 8 hours a day, her feet swelling, her back aching. But she ate. She ate for 2. She saved every single dollar, hiding it in a sock under her thin mattress. Mrs. Petrov would often accidentally pack extra moussaka or a block of feta for Ella to take home. She never asked about a husband. She never asked about Eleanor's past. She just gave her work, and with it, a sliver of dignity. 4 weeks before her due date, the divorce papers finally found her. A smug-looking process server tracked her to the diner. Silas, Peter's lawyer, had been thorough. The papers were delivered during the lunch rush, a deliberate, final humiliation. The grounds weren't irreconcilable differences. They were abandonment and infidelity. Eleanor's blood ran cold as she read the accusations. Peter was claiming she had abandoned him, that she had been unstable and promiscuous. He was even contesting the paternity of the baby, demanding a test, all while petitioning the court to waive his rights and responsibilities. He wasn't just divorcing her, he was erasing her. He was building a legal fortress to ensure she and his child could never, ever lay claim to a single penny of the Adler-Sterling fortune. Mrs. Petrov took one look at Eleanor's ashen face, snatched the papers from her hand, and dragged her into the back office. "This man," Mrs. Petrov said, her Greek accent thickening with rage as she scanned the legal jargon. "He is scarta. He is garbage. You will not sign this." "What can I do?" Eleanor wept. "I have no money, no lawyer. You have a child. His child. That is not nothing," Mrs. Petrov declared. "We will find a lawyer, a legal aid lawyer. You will fight this. But first, you will eat. And then we make a plan." But they never got the chance. That night, Eleanor's water broke. It was a long, terrifying labor. She was alone. The nurses at the public hospital were kind, but overworked. As the sun rose over Lake Michigan, casting a pale grey light into the sterile room, Eleanor gave birth to a daughter. She was tiny, 6 pounds, with a tuft of dark hair and a ferocious cry. Eleanor held her, and the black hole in her heart filled with a white-hot, protective love that burned away everything else. "Lily," she whispered, kissing the baby's head. "Your name is Lily. And I promise you, Lily, they will never hurt us again. I promise you. We will be safe." She was discharged 2 days later. She and Lily went back to the single, cold room. Eleanor looked at the divorce papers on her nightstand, the accusations of her infidelity, the demand for a paternity test. "He wants to play, Lily," Eleanor whispered to her sleeping newborn. "Fine, but he doesn't know the rules. He doesn't know me." She was no longer Eleanor Adler, the discarded wife. She wasn't even Ella Vance, the dishwasher. She was Lily's mother. And she was about to find out just who she really was. Life with a newborn in a one-room apartment was a brutal test of endurance. Eleanor's days were a cycle of feeding, washing diapers in the sink, and walking the floors with a colicky Lily. Mrs. Petrov, a godsend, let her bring Lily to the diner, where the baby slept in a bassinet in the back office, while Eleanor prepped vegetables and balanced the books. Eleanor was smart. She'd been a scholarship student in college, where she'd met Peter, and had a natural affinity for numbers. Mrs. Petrov, impressed, soon had Ella doing payroll and managing inventory. When Lily was 6 months old, a letter arrived. It was forwarded from the shelter, which had forwarded it from her last known address, the Lincoln Park mansion. It had taken months to find her. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, and embossed with the name of a prestigious law firm in downtown Chicago, Hayes, Cromwell and Finch. She opened it with trembling hands. It was formal, dense, and confusing. It referred to the estate of Mr. Daniel Vance and requested her presence to discuss an urgent matter of probate. "Daniel Vance," she murmured. That was her father's name. Eleanor's father was a ghost. He had abandoned her and her mother when Eleanor was 3. Her mother, until her dying day, had referred to him as that no-good, wandering dreamer. Eleanor had assumed he was long dead, or had simply vanished into the ether of forgotten, irresponsible men. She called Mrs. Petrov, who insisted on closing the diner for the afternoon, to go with her. "You do not see men like this," she said, tapping the embossed letter. "Alone. They are sharks in better suits. I will be your, how you say? Your babushka." The offices of Hayes, Cromwell and Finch were on the 80th floor of the Willis Tower. The lobby was all marble and hushed, expensive silence. Eleanor, in her best and only clean blouse, felt hopelessly out of place. They were shown into a palatial office overlooking the city. A man rose to greet them. He was not a shark. He was in his late 60s, with kind eyes, a silver-white beard, and a gentle demeanour. "Miss Vance?" he asked, extending a hand to Eleanor. I go by Ella, or Eleanor. My married name is, this is my daughter, Lily. She is beautiful," the man said, smiling at the baby in Eleanor's arms. "I am Julian Hayes. I was your father's lawyer, and, I'd like to think, his friend." "You knew my father?" Eleanor was stunned. "For 25 years. Please, sit." Julian gestured to the leather chairs. Mrs. Petroff sat stiffly, her eyes darting around the room, ready to defend Eleanor from a sudden attack. "Miss Vance, Eleanor, I'm afraid I am the bearer of sad news. Your father, Daniel, passed away 6 weeks ago. A heart attack. It was very sudden." Eleanor didn't know what to feel. She hadn't seen this man in over 20 years. "I'm sorry to hear that," she said, the words feeling hollow. "He was a remarkable man," Julian said, his eyes misting slightly. "Very complicated. He asked me to find you upon his death. He's been trying to find you for years, you know." He was? "Yes. After your mother passed, the trail went cold. He respected her wish to keep you separate. He was..." Julian sighed. "Eleanor, what did your mother tell you about your father?" "That he was a broke musician. That he ran off and left us with nothing." Julian Hayes let out a long, slow breath. He leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "Eleanor, your mother and father, their story was a tragedy, but not in the way you were told. Your father, Daniel Vance, was not a broke musician. He was the eldest son of one of the wealthiest and most reclusive families in New England, the Vances of Hartford." Eleanor's head spun. "What?" "Daniel fell in love with your mother, a beautiful, spirited woman who was, in his family's eyes, unsuitable. When he refused to leave her, his father, your grandfather, Theron Vance, disinherited him, cut him off without a single penny. So yes, for a time they were poor. He was a musician, and when you were born, the pressure was immense. He didn't run off. His father offered him a terrible choice: come back, alone, and his new heir, which was you, would be provided for. Or stay, and Theron would use his power to ruin you both. Daniel, he made a choice. He thought he was saving you. He left, broke his own heart, and planned to build a fortune to come back for you. But he never did, Eleanor whispered, a new, ancient pain welling up. Oh, but he did, Julian said softly. He didn't just build a fortune, Eleanor. He built an empire. Daniel was a genius. He had a brilliant mind for coding and logistics. He moved to California in the 90s, changed his name, and founded a software company, a logistics company, a dozen other things. He lived simply, in a small apartment in Palo Alto. He never remarried. He poured every ounce of his brilliance into his work, all for you. Julian slid a thick portfolio across the desk. Eleanor, your father, Daniel Vance, died with a net worth of, well, after taxes, it's estimated at $947 million. Eleanor's vision tunneled. The room went silent. Mrs. Petroff gripped her hand. And, Julian continued, his voice gentle, you are his sole heir. Eleanor stared at him. She looked at Lily, sleeping peacefully in her arms. She thought of the $10,000 check on the rain-soaked marble. She thought of the food pantry, the cold room, the accusations of infidelity. He left it all. To me? Everything. Vance Holdings, a portfolio of tech stocks, real estate, and 2 highly profitable logistics firms. And this. Julian handed her a small, worn, leather-bound book. His journal. He said it would explain more than he ever could. Eleanor was no longer Eleanor Adler, the victim. She wasn't Ella Vance, the dishwasher. She was Eleanor Vance. She was one of the wealthiest women in the country. She looked up at Julian, the tears in her eyes not of sadness, but of a terrifying, cold, and sudden clarity. "Mr. Hayes," she said, her voice no longer a whisper, "I need you to do something for me. I need you to find me the most aggressive, most ruthless divorce attorney in the city of Chicago." Julian Hayes smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "I don't think you'll need one, Eleanor. You see, I'm a probate lawyer, but my firm's specialty is litigation. And from what I've read, Mr. Adler's lawyer, Silas, is rather sloppy. He took the divorce papers Mrs. Petrov had brought. Abandonment, infidelity, paternity contest. Oh my, this is a gift." "What do you mean?" "I mean, Ms. Vance," Julian said, his kind eyes turning hard. "We are not going to respond to this. We are going to let Mr. Adler think you are still a terrified, broke, single mother. We're going to let him proceed with his engagement. We're going to let him build his new life on his foundation of lies. And then we are going to take a bulldozer to it." "But the divorce, he'll try to get a default judgment. But given the irregularities in his petition, it will be trivial to vacate. No, Eleanor, you are not just going to divorce him. You are going to ruin him." Over the next year, Eleanor vanished. She moved, with Lily and Mrs. Petrov, whom she named Vice President of Domestic Affairs with an astronomical salary, into a secure, unlisted penthouse. She didn't buy flashy cars or designer clothes. She learned. She sat with Julian Hayes, with her father's CFOs, with her new legal team. She learned about finance. She learned about real estate. She learned about power. She read her father's journals, and in them she found a man of profound intellect and a deep, aching love for the daughter he'd never known. She inherited his brilliance, and she honed it with her own survivor's steel. She discovered she was very, very good at this. She had a mind for systems, for finding the weakness in a structure. She wasn't just the owner of Vance Holdings. She was its CEO. She let the divorce proceedings initiated by Peter sit, letting his lawyers file motion after motion into a void, all of which her own team silently and invisibly countered, keeping the case in a state of legal limbo. Peter and his lawyer Silas assumed she was just off the grid and unreachable, a legal ghost. And one day, a year into her new life, a file landed on her desk. It was a potential acquisition, a portfolio of distressed real estate, and a name on the asset sheet made her blood turn to ice. Willow Creek Estates. While Eleanor was being reborn in fire and finance, Peter Adler was ascending to his own personal heaven. The merger of Adler Equity and Sterling Investments was a roaring success. More than a merger, it was an absorption. The Adler name was quietly dropped, and Peter was named COO of the new Sterling Adler Global, a title that came with a corner office overlooking the Chicago River and an 8-figure salary. He and Isabella Sterling were the city's new golden couple. Their engagement party was the event of the season. Their wedding, planned for the following summer, was already being whispered about as a merger of dynasties. Genevieve Adler was in a state of constant, unbearable ecstasy. She had won. She had engineered her son's entire life, cutting out the cancer of his first unfortunate marriage and grafting him onto the Sterling family tree. She was a queen mother, and Isabella, with her perfect pedigree and cold, ambitious heart, was the daughter-in-law she had always deserved. Peter, for his part, rarely thought of Eleanor. When he did, it was with a vague, dismissive annoyance. He'd heard through Silas that she'd disappeared, probably gone back to whatever trailer park she'd crawled out of, he assumed. He'd had the private investigator he'd hired to track her down and serve the papers, report that she'd been spotted, heavily pregnant, washing dishes in a greasy spoon. The report had made him feel a flash of something. Guilt. No. Disgust. It was embarrassing. He was glad he'd cut her loose. He, Peter Adler, couldn't have a child of his associated with that kind of squalor. The paternity contest in the divorce filing had been Genevieve's idea, a scorched earth tactic to ensure that even if the child was his, it would have no legal claim on him. Silas had eventually reported that he'd served her at the diner. But then, nothing. She never responded. She never appeared in court. After months of filings, Silas had managed to get a default judgment. "She's a ghost, Peter," Silas had said, signing the final papers. "She never contested. The divorce is final. She abandoned the case, just like she abandoned the marriage. You are a free man." Peter had felt a profound sense-play of relief. The final thread was cut. He was clean. To celebrate his new life, his promotion, and his engagement, he and Isabella, and Genevieve, who would have her own in-law suite, moved. They didn't just buy a house, they acquired a lifestyle. Willow Creek Estates was the most exclusive, most opulent gated community in the Chicago suburbs. It wasn't just a collection of mansions, it was a curated living experience. Each home was a sprawling, custom-built testament to obscene wealth, set on acres of manicured lawns. There was a golf course designed by a legend, a clubhouse that resembled a French chateau, and a security force that could rival a small country's military. Peter's new home was the crown jewel, a 20,000-square-foot Georgian mansion at the end of a winding drive, with a 10-car garage, an infinity pool, and a view of the private lake. It was, in a word, perfect. There was, however, one small, persistent annoyance. The house, like all houses in Willow Creek, wasn't owned. Not outright. It was part of a complex, 99-year lease and ownership agreement with the development's holding company, Willow Creek Management, LLC. It was a legal quirk designed to keep the community pure. The LLC had to approve all residents, all sales, all everything. It was, in theory, the ultimate in exclusive living. In practice, it was a headache. "The fountain in the motor court is green," Genevieve complained one afternoon, 2 years into their new life. "And the north wing air conditioning sounds like a dying walrus. I've called the management company 3 times. "I'll handle it, Mother," Peter said, annoyed. He was trying to plan the party of all parties, his 40th birthday and his official engagement celebration, all rolled into one. Robert Sterling would be there. The governor would be there. This was his true arrival. He too had noticed issues. The landscaping, once pristine, was looking a bit ragged. The security gates were slow. When he called the management company, he no longer got the crisp, efficient property manager. He got a new man, a Mr. Jones, who sounded bored and vaguely incompetent. "It's a holding company, Peter. What do you expect?" His father-in-law, Robert Sterling, had boomed over lunch. "Place is probably leveraged to the hilt. Bad management. In fact, I've heard rumors the whole LLC is in financial trouble. Some idiot overextended." Peter felt a knot of anxiety. "Trouble? What kind of trouble? We've poured millions into the interiors." Robert Sterling laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "Don't worry about it. It's just a shell company. Someone will buy it out, probably for pennies on the dollar. Might even be me. I've had my eye on that whole portfolio. A distressed asset is a terrible thing to waste." Peter relaxed. Of course, Robert would handle it. Robert handled everything. He turned his attention back to the party. It would be a masquerade ball, tents on the lawn, a full orchestra, valets. It would be the night he, Peter Adler, was finally and irrevocably crowned king. He stood on his massive terrace, overlooking the lake, a glass of 500-a-bottle scotch in his hand. He thought, for a fleeting, inexplicable second, of Eleanor. He pictured her in that greasy diner, covered in grime, a screaming brat on her hip. He laughed out loud. He raised his glass to the sunset. To the future, he said to himself. He had no idea that his past was looking at a spreadsheet with his name on it. Eleanor's new office was the antithesis of Peter's. It was not a monument to ego. It was a command center. Located in a nondescript, brutally secure building in the financial district, the headquarters of Vance Holdings was a hub of quiet, lethal efficiency. Eleanor, now 5 years older, polished, and with an aura of command that was utterly natural, stood before a wall of monitors. Her dark hair was pulled back into a severe but elegant chignon. Her simple, dark blue sheath dress cost more than Peter's tuxedo, but it was designed to be forgotten. She was the only thing in the room that mattered. Julian Hayes, now her general counsel and trusted advisor, stood beside her. "Here it is," Julian said, pointing to a complex flowchart on the main screen. "Willow Creek Management LLC. As you suspected, it's a house of cards." "Talk to me," Eleanor said, her voice calm and low. "The LLC is a subsidiary of a larger holding company, Apex Real Estate Partners. Apex took out massive loans to build Willow Creek and 2 other developments. The problem is," Julian zoomed in on a block of red text, "they were too exclusive. They built for a 0.01% that didn't materialize as quickly as they'd hoped. Their occupancy is only at 60%, and their overhead is astronomical. They are bleeding cash. And the residents? Locked into 99-year leases that are ironclad. They pay their HOA and lease fees to the LLC, but the LLC name is failing to pay its own creditors, namely, the bank that holds the master mortgage on the entire development." Eleanor looked at the name of the bank. Then she looked at another file, one her research team had compiled. "Robert Sterling," she said. It wasn't a question. "Exactly," Julian confirmed. "Sterling Adler Global has been buying up Apex's debt, aggressively, not just from the primary bank, but from their secondary creditors, their landscapers, their security firm. They've been buying it all, under a dozen different shell companies for the last 6 months." "He's not trying to save them," Eleanor murmured, the strategy unfolding in her mind. "He's orchestrating a hostile takeover. He's going to consolidate all the debt, trigger a default, and then, as the primary creditor, seize the entire development in the bankruptcy auction. For pennies on the dollar, as he'd say." "It's a classic Sterling move," Julian said. "Brutal, effective. And he's made one mistake." "He's moving too slowly," Eleanor said, a rare, thin smile touching her lips. "He thinks he's the only shark in the water. He's waiting for the final default, which is scheduled for the end of the quarter. He wants to get it all, but he doesn't own it yet. Apex still does, and Apex is desperate." Eleanor turned to her CFO. "What is our liquid cash position?" The CFO didn't blink. "As of this morning, just over 1.2 billion, Ms. Vance." "Good." She turned back to Julian. "I am not interested in the debt. I am interested in the asset. I want you to go to Apex Real Estate Partners today. You will not offer them pennies. You will offer them a lifeline. You will pay over market value. You will not just buy the Willow Creek LLC. You will buy all of Apex, the entire company. You will pay off their primary bank loan in full before Sterling even knows what's happening. You will make the owner of Apex, a man named George Prentice, so rich, so fast, that he'll sign the papers before his lunch gets cold. Julian raised an eyebrow. Eleanor, that's a premium of maybe $100 million for a failing company. It's not a failing company, Eleanor said, her eyes fixed on the name Peter Adler in the resident directory. It's a distressed asset, and I'm not buying it to make a profit. I'm buying it to make a point. I want this done by tomorrow, and I want it done through a triple-blind shell corp based in Delaware. No one, not Sterling, not Peter, not George Prentice. No one traces this back to Vance Holdings. And Robert Sterling, Julian asked. When he finds out the company he's been strangling has suddenly paid off all its loans and been sold from under him, he will be furious. He'll lose millions in this play. Yes, Eleanor said. He will. That's the other half of the point. The deal was done in 36 hours. George Prentice, the beleaguered owner of Apex, thought he was hallucinating when an offer came in, not only to buy his entire company, but to make him whole on all his debts. He signed so fast the ink smeared. Robert Sterling, when he got the call that the Apex loan had been paid in full by an anonymous third party, threw a crystal decanter across his office. His sure thing had just cost him $50 million in bad debt he'd acquired. He had no asset, and he had an army of angry subcontractors he now had to pay. Back at Willow Creek Estates, the changes were subtle, then sudden. Peter's complaints, which had been ignored for weeks, were suddenly addressed. A new, silent, unnervingly efficient landscaping team arrived and restored the grounds to pristine perfection. The green fountain was scrubbed. The air conditioning in Genevieve's wing was replaced with a new, silent system. And then the other changes began. The residents received a new community guidelines packet from the new management of Willow Creek LLC. All exterior modifications, including temporary structures, tents, etc., must be submitted for approval 30 days in advance. Guest lists for any gathering over 20 people must be provided to management 72 hours in advance for security screening. Noise curfews will be strictly enforced at 10 p.m. This is outrageous, Genevieve shrieked, rattling the thick, cream-colored paper. A curfew? For us? And Peter, your party. The tent is a temporary structure. It's fine, Mother, Peter snapped, though he was worried. He'd sent the plans for his masquerade ball to the management office. The response he got back was chillingly polite. Dear Mr. Adler, we have received your event request. Please note that the new landscaping on the east lawn, which your tent would damage, is valued at over $250,000. Your security deposit on file is insufficient. We will require an additional bond of $500,000 to be placed in escrow to cover potential damages. Additionally, your proposed guest list of 300 exceeds community guidelines. A security and parking surcharge of $75,000 will be applied. Finally, your orchestra's sound check must be complete by 4:01 p.m. and all music must cease by 10:00 p.m. No exceptions. We look forward to your compliance. Sincerely, the Office of the Landlord. 500,000. Peter was apoplectic. They're shaking me down. This is extortion. Call Robert, Genevieve demanded. Peter did. Robert Sterling was still furious about the Apex deal. Don't bother me with this, Peter. I'm trying to find out who this new mystery owner is. Some Some shadow company bought the whole portfolio. Just pay the fee. We can't look weak. Not now. We'll deal with this new landlord after your party. Grumbling, Peter wrote the check. He would not be intimidated. He would have this party. It was too important. It was the night that would cement his and the Sterlings' absolute dominance in this city. The night of the party arrived. It was a perfect, clear night. The massive white tent looked spectacular. The valets were lined up. The orchestra was playing softly. Peter, dressed as a Venetian king, and Isabella, a glittering ice queen, stood at the top of their grand staircase, ready to receive their guests. At 7 p.m. the first cars arrived. At 7:05 p.m. the front gates of Willow Creek Estates jammed. At 7:10 p.m. the sprinklers on the front lawn, and only the front lawn where the valets were stationed, burst to life, dousing the valets and the first row of arriving cars. At 7:15 p.m. the power to the entire mansion, including the tent, shut off. The orchestra went silent. The lights went out. The only sound was the hissing of the sprinklers and the angry horns of a dozen limousines stuck outside the gate. "What is going on?" Peter roared into the darkness. A single beam of light appeared at the end of his driveway. A car. A modest black sedan. It hadn't come from the gate. It had come from the service road. The car pulled up to the front door. The engine cut. The back door opened. A woman stepped out. She was not in costume. She was in a simple, dark business dress. She was flanked by two large, imposing men in suits and a third, older gentleman holding a briefcase. She walked calmly past the sputtering, soaked valets, up the steps, and into the grand, dark foyer, which was now lit only by the panicked glows of 100 cell phones. Peter, his face purple with rage under his ridiculous gold mask, stormed toward her. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded. "My party is ruined. I'll have you arrested. Security. Essig." The woman stopped in front of him. The older man with the briefcase shined a small, bright flashlight, illuminating her face. Peter's voice died in his throat. Genevieve gasped, dropping her champagne glass. Isabella Sterling looked confused. "Peter, darling, who is this?" Peter couldn't speak. He was looking at a ghost. But it wasn't the gaunt, terrified girl he'd thrown out 5 years ago. This woman was powerful. Her eyes were not filled with tears. They were filled with ice. "Eleanor," he choked out. "Hello, Peter," Eleanor Vance said, her voice clear and strong, echoing in the silent, cavernous hall. "Genevieve, you're looking well." "What? What are you doing here?" Peter sputtered. "How did you get in? This is private property." "It is," Eleanor agreed, "which is why I'm here. We've been receiving reports of disturbances, a power outage, a malfunctioning sprinkler system. As the new owner, I had to come and inspect the property myself." A deafening silence fell over the foyer. Even the guests stopped whispering. "Owner?" Isabella said, laughing a brittle, nervous laugh. "What is she talking about, Peter? Is this some street person?" I... Peter was staring at Julian Hayes, who was now opening his briefcase. "Mr. Adler," Julian Hayes said, his voice professorial and sharp. "My client, Miss Eleanor Vance, is the sole proprietor of Vance Holdings, which is the parent company of the Delaware Corporation, that, as of 36 hours ago, purchased Apex Real Estate Partners, the holding company of Willow Creek Management, LLC. He handed a sheaf of papers to Peter. Eleanor stepped closer, her voice dropping so only Peter, Genevieve, and Isabella could hear her. "You called my baby baggage. You said I was an embarrassment. You live in a beautiful home, Peter. Truly. The grounds are lovely. But you are just a tenant." She looked around the dark room, at the ruined party, at the stunned, glittering guests. "I am the landlord," Eleanor said, her voice ringing out. "And I'm afraid you're in violation of your lease. The noise, the unapproved structures, it's all a bit much." She looked at Isabella. "Isabella Sterling, a pleasure. I have all the files on your father's creative attempts to acquire this property. Fraud, market manipulation, it's all very, very interesting. I'm sure the SEC will think so too." Isabella's face went white. She looked at Peter, her eyes suddenly filled with dawning horror and contempt. Eleanor turned back to Peter. "Oh, and the power. It's not coming back on, not tonight. And the sprinklers? They're on well, let's just say it's a new system. It's very thorough." She gave him a cold, empty smile. "Enjoy your party, Peter. Get your things. My security team will be here at 9 a.m. tomorrow to escort you, your mother, and your fiancé off my property." She turned, her work done. She walked out of the foyer, got back in her car, and drove away, not even looking back at the smoking crater she had left of his life. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. As Eleanor's sedan disappeared, the party disintegrated. The guests, the governor, the CEOs, the city's elite, fled the darkness like rats, scrambling for their cars, desperate to escape the blast radius. In the cavernous, pitch-black foyer, only Peter, Genevieve, and Isabella remained, lit by the accusing beams of their cell phones. "Peter!" Isabella's voice was a shard of ice. "Who was that?" "It's complicated," Peter stammered, ripping the mask from his face. She's my ex-wife." "Your ex-wife?" Isabella shrieked. "The one you told me was a checkout girl who ran off. The unstable one. She looked like she just bought the world." "She's nobody," Genevieve hissed. "This is a trick. Robert will handle this." "Oh, I don't think Daddy's handling anything," Isabella snapped. "Did you hear what she said? SEC, fraud. My father just lost millions on this property, and now his future son-in-law's psycho ex-wife is threatening to send him to prison. Our engagement, our marriage, it's a business deal. And you, Peter, you just became the single worst deal of my father's career." She stormed out into the night, leaving Peter and Genevieve alone in the dark. By 9 a.m. the next morning, the story was everywhere. Socialite's party from hell, ousted wife returns as mystery landlord. Eleanor Vance, the multi-billionaire head of Vance Holdings, was suddenly the most talked-about woman in America. Peter's phone was exploding. His first call was from Robert Sterling. It was not a conversation. It was a 5-minute tirade of screaming that ended with a simple, "You're fired. Clean out your desk." The Sterling-Adler Global Alliance was over. His career was over. Then, at 9 a.m. on the dot, Eleanor's security team arrived. They were not valets. They were ex-military professionals in black suits. "Mr. Adler, Mrs. Adler," the team leader said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Per the terms of your lease agreement, which you are in breach of, you have 60 minutes to vacate the premises with your personal effects." "This is my home," Peter roared. "This is the property of Miss Vance," the man corrected. "And you are trespassing. 60 minutes." The humiliation was absolute. Peter and Genevieve were forced to scramble, throwing clothes and jewelry into suitcases. They were escorted, like common criminals, past the new security at the front gate and left on the curb. They checked into a suite at the Four Seasons, a pathetic attempt to cling to their former status. "We'll sue her," Genevieve kept repeating, her hands shaking. "Silas will handle it." "Silas isn't answering my calls, Mother," Peter yelled. He was a pariah. And then the final, crushing blow. A courier arrived at the hotel, a new envelope, thick, cream-coloured, from Hayes, Cromwell and Finch. It wasn't a lawsuit, it was a motion to vacate judgment. Peter's hands shook as he read the legal filing. It was a petition from Eleanor Vance's legal team to reopen their divorce. "What is this?" Genevieve demanded, snatching it from him. Silas said the divorce was final. She read the attached affidavit. It was from one of the nation's top forensic handwriting experts, attesting with 100% certainty that the signature on the original acceptance of service document, the one that supposedly proved Eleanor had received the papers, was a forgery. The report noted, with chilling detail, that the forgery bore all the hallmarks of Genevieve Adler's known handwriting. "You," Peter whispered, turning to his mother. "What did you do?" I... Genevieve's face was a mottled, papery white. "She disappeared. She wouldn't sign. She was in the way. Silas said we just needed proof. So I fixed it." "You fixed it?" Peter sank into a chair. "You forged a federal document. You committed perjury." The motion wasn't just to reopen the divorce. It was to have the entire original filing struck as fraudulent. "What does this mean?" Genevieve whispered, her arrogance finally, truly gone. "It means," Peter said, his voice a dead monotone, "that the divorce was never valid. It means, for the last 5 years, I've been a bigamist. It means my engagement to Isabella was a sham. It means I'm still married." He looked at his mother, his eyes hollow. "It means," he said, "that Eleanor is still my wife." The hotel room phone rang. Peter picked it up. "Mr. Adler," the smooth, kind voice of Julian Hayes said, "Miss Vance is prepared to discuss the terms of your new divorce, or we can proceed with the criminal and civil charges for fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. I'll let you decide. We'll be sending a car for you." The car that arrived for Peter was not a limousine. It was the same modest sedan Eleanor had used. It drove him to a quiet park by the lagoon. He saw her standing by the water, watching a 5-year-old girl in a bright yellow dress chase a duck. The girl was laughing, a pure, joyous sound. She had his eyes. Eleanor turned as he approached. "Lily," she called, her voice soft. "Mommy needs to talk to this man. Can you go play with Auntie Elena?" A smiling Mrs. Petrov waved from a nearby bench, and Lily ran to her. She's beautiful, Eleanor," Peter whispered. "Her name is Lily Vance," Eleanor said, her voice flat and cold. "She is not your daughter. You waived that right when you contested her paternity. You declared in a sworn legal document that she was not yours. And I am inclined to agree. She has none of your weakness." "Eleanor, I'm ruined," he said, the words spilling out. "My job, Isabella, the house, it's all gone." "You think this was about the house?" Eleanor almost laughed. "I sold Willow Creek Estates this morning to a hotel consortium, made a tidy 20% profit. I don't want that house, Peter. This wasn't revenge. This was pest control. You were a loose end. The divorce you filed was a lie, and I cannot build a future for my daughter on a foundation that still has your name attached to it." Julian Hayes approached, holding a single, slim document. "This," Eleanor said, "is our real divorce. A simple, no-fault dissolution." Peter's eyes narrowed. "And if I don't sign? If I'm still your husband, that makes me entitled." Eleanor's smile was the coldest thing he had ever seen. "If you don't sign, Peter, then Julian will walk straight from this park to the district attorney's office with a mountain of evidence for your and your mother's role in forgery, perjury, and wire fraud. They are felonies, Peter. You'll be in prison for 10 years. Your mother, maybe 5. She gestured to the pen Julian was holding. "Or, you sign. You disappear. You take your mother, and you will be free. You, who had everything, get your freedom. I, who had nothing, get mine." Peter looked at the paper. He saw the ironclad bars of a prison cell. His hand shaking, he took the pen and signed his name. "It's done," he whispered. "Yes," Eleanor said. She took the paper, handed it to Julian without a glance, and turned her back on him. She walked across the grass, scooped up her laughing daughter, and hugged her. Together, her new family walked to their car and drove away. Peter Adler was left alone in the park. He was no one. He was free. Eleanor Vance moved her headquarters to New York. She never looked back. She used her inheritance to establish the Lily and Daniel Vance Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to providing legal aid and housing for mothers and children in need. She was, finally, free too. And just like that, with a single signature, Peter Adler was erased. He learned the hard way that the person you step on when you're climbing the ladder might be the one who owns the entire building. Eleanor's story isn't just about getting rich. It's about reclaiming her power, her name, and her child's future. She didn't just want revenge, she wanted justice, and she got it. What do you think about Eleanor's final move? Was it pure justice, or the coldest revenge? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. This story is a powerful reminder that your past does not define your future, and underestimating someone is the most dangerous mistake you can make. If you were moved by this story, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more incredible true-life dramas. Don't forget to ring that bell so you never miss an update. He was a man who had everything: a high-powered job, a glamorous fiancée, and a deep-seated contempt for the woman he'd left behind. She was his ex-wife, the simple woman he'd divorced for lacking ambition. When he heard she was back in town, he saw a chance for the ultimate humiliation. He invited her to his company's exclusive gala, a black-tie event for the city's elite, planning to parade his success in her face. But there was one detail he never knew, one secret she had kept for 2 years. She wasn't just a guest. She was the owner of the entire company, and he had just invited his boss to her own party, planning to mock her in front of her entire board. Sawyer Roth adjusted the knot of his silk tie, his reflection staring back at him from the floor-to-ceiling glass of his corner office. 22 floors above the Chicago River, he felt like a king. As the senior vice president of business development at Apex Designs, the city's most prestigious architectural firm, Sawyer wasn't just successful, he was a symbol of it. His life was a curated masterpiece: the minimalist, steel and glass apartment, the gleaming German sports car, and his fiancée Bianca Slade, a woman whose beauty was matched only by her family's social standing. He was in the final stages of planning the firm's 50th anniversary gala. This wasn't just a party. It was his coronation. For 2 years, Apex had been run by a transition team representing the estate of the reclusive founder, J.M. Price. The mysterious new owner, known only by those initials, had never been seen. Sawyer, who had single-handedly landed the, supposedly, $200 million Crescendo residential tower project, was certain. The owner's first public appearance at the gala would be to announce him as the new CEO. He was scrolling through the catering proofs when his office phone buzzed. It was his colleague, Philip. "Hey, Sawyer, quick question about the seating," Philip said. "But first, you'll never guess who I ran into at lunch. Remember your ex-wife, Jeanette?" Sawyer's grip tightened on his mouse. Jeanette. The name tasted like ash. He hadn't seen her in 3 years, not since the divorce. She was his one nagging failure. He had discovered her working as a waitress in a small diner while he was a junior architect. He'd been captivated by her quiet intelligence, but as his star rose, her simplicity became an anchor. She was studying business at night, but he saw no fire in her. "I need a queen, Jane, not a server," he had told her the day he packed his bags. "I'm building an empire, and you're still stuck. You have no ambition." "Jeanette, what about her?" Sawyer said, feigning disinterest. "She's back in town. I saw her at the Bristol. Looked the same. Simple. I think she's working some admin job over at a logistics firm. Said she was just getting resettled." A slow, cruel smile spread across Sawyer's face. "An admin job. Perfect. Is that so?" he murmured. "That's interesting." After he hung up, the seed of an idea began to sprout, nasty and thrilling. He could just ignore her. Or he could perform a public service. He could show her, in one glittering, overwhelming night, exactly what she had given up. He could show her the empire he'd built, the queen he'd found, and the pathetic, small life she was destined for. It wasn't just about success. It was about proving he was right. He brought it up to Bianca, that evening in their penthouse. Bianca, filing her nails on a white suede chaise, loved the idea. "Oh, darling, that's vicious. I love it," she purred, the diamonds on her engagement ring catching the light. "A little charity case for the gala. We can introduce her to the board chairman. It'll be adorable watching her try to curtsy." "It's an educational opportunity," Sawyer said, pouring 2 glasses of scotch. "It will give her closure." He found her email address through a mutual acquaintance. He spent a full 10 minutes crafting the message, his fingers flying across the keyboard, his heart pounding with a smug, vindictive thrill. Subject: "An opportunity for you, Jeanette. I heard from Philip that you've returned to Chicago. I trust you're finding your footing. As you may, or may not know, I am organizing the Apex Designs 50th Anniversary Gala at the Fairmont. It's a rather exclusive event, but in the interest of old times, I've managed to secure you a +1, despite the exclusive list. I think it would be illuminating for you to see how the other half lives. It might provide you with some much-needed perspective, or at least a good meal. Let my assistant know if you can make it. I'm sure you don't have many black tie dresses hanging in your closet, so don't feel pressured to buy something new. Just try to look presentable. All the best. Sawyer Roth, SVP, Apex Designs." He hit send, imagining her face, the embarrassment, the shame, the bitter realization of her mistake. 20 miles away, in a sleek, soundproof office overlooking Lake Michigan, a notification chimed. Jeanette Price looked up from a complex financial projection. Her office was the opposite of Sawyer's. Warm woods, soft lighting, walls lined with books, not trophies. She read the email. Once. Twice. A small, cold smile touched her lips. She thought of the empire she hadn't just inherited, but had spent 2 years secretly rebuilding. She thought of the audits, the restructuring, and the stack of files on her desk, one of which had Sawyer's name on it, flagged in red. Her executive assistant, a sharp, older man named Martin, entered with a stack of letters. "More RSVPs for the gala, Ms. Price, and the final draft of your speech." "Thank you, Martin," she said, not looking up from her screen. "And Martin, I'll be needing that +1. "Ma'am?" She clicked. "Reply. Sawyer is overdue for his performance review. I think a black tie setting is perfectly appropriate." She typed one word and hit send. Delighted. The divorce had been brutal, not in its legality, but in its emotional violence. Sawyer hadn't just left. He had dissected her, piece by piece, until she felt worthless. No ambition was his kindest criticism. Provincial, frightened, and permanently small were his favorites. He told her he was destined for greatness, and she was the ballast he was cutting loose. She had signed the papers in a daze, crushed by the man she had supported, loved, and put through his final certifications while she worked double shifts at the diner and attended night school. She had cried for a week. Then she got angry. Then she got focused. 2 months after the divorce was finalized, the call came. Jeanette's maternal grandfather, J.M. Price, had passed away. She barely knew the man. He was a reclusive, almost mythical figure her mother had been estranged from. Jeanette had met him once, at her mother's funeral. He was a quiet, imposing man who had looked at her with a piercing, analytical gaze. She was summoned to a law office in downtown Chicago. The lawyer, Mr. Coleman, who she would later learn was the chairman of the board, explained the situation in disbelief. J.M. Price, a man who had built a multi-billion-dollar holding company, had left everything to her. Not his distant sons, not a charity, but his only granddaughter. The holding company, Price Equities, owned dozens of properties, several tech startups, and one passion project he'd founded in his youth, Apex Designs. Jeanette was staggered. She was 28 years old and had just inherited an empire. But the inheritance came with a caveat, a handwritten letter from the old man himself. Jeanette, your mother was soft. I was hard. You, I see, are steel. But steel needs to be forged. The companies are yours, but they are full of vipers. Apex, my first love, is the worst of them. They are arrogant and fat. Do not let them see you. Do not let them know you. They will eat you alive. Be a ghost. Watch, learn, and when you are ready, strike. Trust Martin. He served me. He will serve you. She took his advice. For the first 6 months, she did nothing but listen. Martin, her grandfather's long-time confidant, and now her executive assistant, became her guide. He was the only person in the world who knew her identity. To the board of Apex, the new owner was J.M. Price, a faceless entity communicating through the lawyers of the estate. Jeanette, meanwhile, got an admin job at one of her own logistics firms, using her mother's maiden name. She sat in a cubicle. She listened to the break-room gossip. She learned the business from the ground up, just as her grandfather had. After a year, she began to manage from the shadows. She moved into her real office, a private floor in a building Price Equities owned, under a shell corporation. She, as J.M. Price, began to issue directives. She demanded audits. She cut fat. She restructured departments. And she watched Sawyer Roth. She saw him rise, promoted by the very vipers her grandfather warned her about. He was all flash. His projects looked incredible on paper, but the audits she requested showed a different story. Thin margins, unhappy clients, and a $200 million contract for the Crescendo Tower that was, to put it mildly, built on a foundation of lies. Sawyer was promising features the firm couldn't deliver on a timeline they couldn't meet. The client, a massive private equity group, was getting nervous. Jane had been preparing to intervene for months. The 50th anniversary gala was her idea. It was to be her introduction. The ghost was finally going to appear, clean house, and set the new standard for her company. Sawyer's invitation wasn't just an insult. It was a cosmic joke. He was a condemned man, blissfully unaware, inviting the executioner to the gallows and offering to buy her a drink. "Are you entirely sure you want to proceed this way, Miss Price?" Martin asked, adjusting his glasses. He was deeply loyal and protective. This is a circus. He's a buffoon. You don't need to subject yourself to this." Jeanette looked at the invitation again. Presentable. Her lip curled. Oh, absolutely, she said, her voice dropping, the steel her grandfather had seen finally forged. Sawyer is the poster child for everything wrong with this company. He's the embodiment of arrogance. The board needs to see what happens when that arrogance is given a platform. She stood and walked to the window, looking down at the city. Her city. He wants me to see his empire, Martin. He has no idea he's been living in mine. The week leading up to the gala was pure adrenaline for Sawyer. He was a whirlwind of motion, confirming vendors, barking orders at his assistants, and practicing his spontaneous acceptance speech for the CEO position. He was so certain of his promotion that he'd already commissioned a custom plaque for his new office. It's about presents, Bianca, he explained, striding around their apartment while she scrolled through Instagram. The board, Coleman, all of them. They respect strength. They saw how I handled the Crescendo deal. I willed it into existence. Of course you did, darling, Bianca said, barely looking up. Now which dress? The red or the redder? Bianca was just as invested in this as he was. Her entire identity was performance. She relished the idea of being a CEO's wife, but even more, she relished the drama of Jeanette's arrival. She actually said yes? Bianca marveled, sitting up. The little mouse has courage, I'll give her that. It's not courage, it's desperation, Sawyer sneered. She wants one last look at the life she could have had. She'll be in the corner, nursing a flat ginger ale, watching me on stage. It's almost sad. His cruelty, however, needed an audience. He found his colleague, Philip, by the elevators. Philip was a competent, if unexciting, architect. Sawyer saw him as a rival, but a non-threatening one. Philip, my man, ready for the big night? Sawyer slapped him on the back. It'll be a night, Philip said, non-committal. Still a lot of whispers about who this J.M. Price is. I heard they're ruthless. The entire third floor was restructured by email. Ruthless is just another word for efficient, Sawyer boasted. You can't make an omelette without breaking a few eggs, Phil. The old guard was weak. This new owner, they know talent. They see what I've done with Crescendo. They're not going to let a rainmaker like me sit in a VP chair for long. I suppose not, Philip said, shifting his briefcase. He, unlike Sawyer, had actually read the internal risk report on the Crescendo project and was deeply worried. Sawyer, high on his own hubris, decided to go one step further. He stopped at a high-end jewelry store on his way home. Not for Bianca, for Jane. He told the saleswoman he needed something for a charity auction, something simple, for someone who doesn't get out much. He settled on a thin, silver-plated bracelet with a single, tiny zirconia. It cost $80. He had it gift-wrapped. He would give it to Jane at the gala, perhaps right after his speech. A little no-hard-feelings trinket. A souvenir from the life she'd never touch. Across town, Jeanette's preparations were of a different nature. She was not planning an outfit. She was planning a war. Her admin job was long forgotten. She was in the main boardroom of Price Equities, flanked by Martin and Mr. Coleman, the chairman of the Apex board. Coleman, a stern man in his 60s, had been skeptical of Jeanette at first. Now he was her most fervent convert. He had seen her turn a dozen failing assets into profitable ventures. The audit is complete, Ms. Price, Coleman said, sliding a thick binder across the table. It's exactly as you suspected. Sawyer Roth is a house of cards. Jeanette opened the binder. The numbers were damning. The $200 million Crescendo contract was not secured. The client, a private equity group called North Star Holdings, was not just nervous, They were actively threatening litigation. Sawyer had hidden the default notices. He had fabricated progress reports. He had, in essence, been lying to the board for 6 months to secure his promotion. "He's been inflating his expenses," Jeanette noted, her finger tracing a line item. "A $5,000 dinner at a Linnea? For client relations?" "A Linnea," Martin specified, "is where his fiancée, Bianca Slade, had her birthday party." "He's not just arrogant, he's a thief," Jeanette said, her voice quiet and deadly. "And the board?" "They are embarrassed," Coleman admitted. "They believed his charm. They wanted to. He was the perfect image. But they are behind you. His fraud voids his contract. His termination will be effective when you decide." "I've decided," Jeanette said, closing the binder. "It will be effective the moment I walk off that stage." "And the gala? The invitation?" Coleman asked, his brow furrowing. "It's a security risk. It's undignified." "It's necessary," Jeanette said. "He wants to make a spectacle of me. He's right. It will be a spectacle. But he's miscast the roles. He thinks he's the star of the show. He's just the before picture." Only then did she turn to her personal preparations. She wasn't having a dress made. She already had her armor. In her private closet was a custom-made outfit. It wasn't a glittering gown. It was a midnight blue silk wool creation that was half suit, half dress. It had sharp, defined shoulders, a severe but elegant neckline, and a cut that was pure, unadulterated power. It was not the dress of a guest. It was the dress of an owner. "He told me to look presentable, Martin," she said, looking at the outfit. "I'm afraid I'm going to have to disappoint him." The grand ballroom at the Fairmont Chicago was a sea of black ties, diamonds, and noise. Champagne flowed from gravity-defying towers. A string quartet played softly in the corner, ignored by the laughing, shouting members of Chicago's financial and architectural elite. Sawyer Roth stood near the grand staircase, his arm possessively around Bianca's waist. Bianca was a vision in blood red, a dress so bright and tight it demanded attention. Sawyer felt a surge of pride. This was his life. These were his people. "There's Coleman," Sawyer muttered, nodding toward the bar. "He looks nervous." "Good. He's probably just anxious about the big announcement." "Stop fidgeting, darling. You're creasing your lapel," Bianca hissed, before turning a dazzling smile on a passing bank president. Philip found them, looking pale. "Sawyer, I just got a text from the North Star client rep. He says he's here. He sounds furious. He said something about fraud?" Sawyer's smile tightened. He grabbed Philip by the elbow, steering him behind a pillar. "You will not breathe a word of this, do you understand? They're just nervous. I'll handle it after my announcement. The rep is probably just trying to squeeze us. Don't ruin this for me." Philip recoiled, nodding silently. Sawyer straightened his tie and returned to Bianca's side, his mask of triumph firmly back in place. "Where is she?" he whispered, scanning the crowd. "It's 8:30. Maybe the little mouse lost her nerve." "Or she couldn't get a cab," Bianca tittered. And then he saw her. Jeanette wasn't announced. She didn't arrive. She simply appeared. She had walked in from a private entrance, bypassed the check-in line, and was now standing by the main doors, speaking quietly with Mr. Coleman, the chairman of the board. Sawyer's first reaction was disappointment. He had braced himself for a pathetic sight, a cheap polyester dress from a department store, frizzy hair, a look of wide-eyed terror. Jane was none of those things. The midnight blue outfit she wore was confusing. It wasn't a ball gown. It was simple, stark, and tailored so perfectly it must have cost a fortune. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon. She wore no jewelry save for a pair of simple diamond studs. She looked formidable. She wasn't looking at the crowd with awe. She was scanning it, her expression analytical. And she was talking to Coleman. Coleman, who was listening to her with a look of intense, deferential respect. What is she doing talking to Coleman? Sawyer stammered. He probably pities her, Bianca scoffed, though a line of uncertainty had appeared on her brow. Look at that dress. It's a suit. She looks like she's here to do someone's taxes. Sawyer, needing to reassert control, grabbed Bianca's hand and strode toward them. This was not how this was supposed to go. He needed to put her back in her box. "Jane!" he boomed, feigning delighted surprise. He put himself physically between her and Coleman. "You made it, and Mr. Coleman, you've met my ex-wife, Jeanette." Coleman looked at Sawyer as if he were something he'd scraped off his shoe. "Mr. Roth," he said, his voice ice. Jane, however, smiled. It was a tiny, polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Hello, Sawyer. Bianca. What a lovely dress." "Thank you," Bianca said, looking Jane up and down. "And you? How resourceful. Did you make it yourself? It's very functional." "It serves its purpose," Jane said evenly. "Well, I'm so glad you came," Sawyer continued, his smugness returning. "He was the VP. She was nobody. Coleman was just being polite. I was worried you'd be intimidated. The ballroom is spectacular, isn't it? This whole event, you know. This was my vision." "It's certainly a vision," Jane said, her eyes sweeping the room. "You spared no expense." "Exactly," Sawyer laughed. "Speaking of which," he pulled her aside, away from Coleman and Bianca. "Listen, Jane, I know this must be a lot for you. Seeing all this. Seeing me. I just want you to know." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small, gift-wrapped box. "I got you something. A little party favor. Just to show there are no hard feelings for how things tapered off for you." He pressed the cheap box into her hand. Jeanette looked at the box. Then she looked at him. For a second, Sawyer felt a chill. Her gaze was not the cowed, heartbroken look he remembered. It was the gaze of a biologist studying an insect. "Sawyer," she said, her voice dangerously quiet, "you have no idea what you've just done." Before he could respond, the lights in the ballroom dimmed. Mr. Coleman had left them and was walking toward the stage. A single spotlight followed him. "This is it," Sawyer whispered, his chest puffing out. He grabbed Bianca's hand. He completely forgot about Jane, who simply let the cheap bracelet fall from her hand, disappearing under a curtain. "Ladies and gentlemen, please, if I may have your attention," Mr. Coleman's voice boomed. Sawyer straightened his tie. He was ready for his new life. "Welcome," Mr. Coleman began, his voice echoing through the silent ballroom. "Welcome to the 50th anniversary of Apex Designs. For half a century, this firm has shaped the skyline of our great city." Sawyer stood near the stage, perfectly positioned. He'd given Bianca a little squeeze. "Get your camera ready," he whispered. "Tonight," Coleman continued, "is not just about honoring our past. It is about launching our future. As many of you know, for the past 2 years, Apex has been under the stewardship of a new, visionary owner who has, until now, chosen to remain private while they restructured this great company from the inside out." Sawyer nodded sagely, as if he were in on it. He saw Philip in the crowd, looking green. He saw the rep from North Star Holdings, standing near the back, looking like thunder. Sawyer ignored them. This was his moment. This new leader has been known to us only by their initials, J.M. Price, an individual who has valued substance over spectacle, integrity over image. "He's talking about me," Sawyer whispered to Bianca, his excitement palpable. "He's using the J.M. Price name as a proxy, but he's describing me, my work, my substance." Bianca was vibrating, her smile locked in place. "It has been my distinct honor," Coleman said, "to work with this individual, to see their sharp, incisive mind and their deep commitment to the real values of this company. Tonight, our owner has decided it is time to step out of the shadows and take their rightful place." Sawyer actually took one step toward the stairs, preparing to ascend. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage the sole proprietor, the new global CEO, and the visionary future of Apex Designs, Miss Jeanette Marie Price." The words dropped into the room like a bomb. Silence. 1,000 eyes scanned the crowd, confused. Sawyer froze. His smile cracked, then dissolved. He looked at Bianca. Her face was a mask of pure, uncomprehending shock. What did he say?" Sawyer stammered. "What name was that?" A single, brilliant white spotlight shot from the back of the room, cutting through the darkness. It didn't land on the stairs. It landed directly on the woman Sawyer had just tried to hand a $80 bracelet. Jeanette. She stood perfectly still as the giant screens on either side of the stage, which had shown the Apex 50 logo, flickered to life. They now showed a professional, powerful headshot of her. Underneath it, the words, "Jeanette M. Price, CEO and owner, Apex Designs." Sawyer stopped breathing. The blood drained from his face, leaving him a sickly, pale grey. He looked at her. Her calm, cold gaze met his. "J.M. Price," Bianca whispered, her voice a strangled gasp. "Jeanette Marie Price." Jane gave her ex-husband a small, tight-lipped nod. It was a nod of dismissal. Then, to the sound of stunned, hesitant applause that slowly grew, she walked past him, her heels clicking purposefully on the floor. She ascended the steps, not as a guest, but as a queen ascending her throne. She shook Coleman's hand and turned to the podium. The Jumbotron showed her face, 20 feet high. She was in command. Sawyer just stood there, a statue of broken ego. His entire world, his future, his empire. It had all just collapsed in on him in the span of 10 seconds. He said to no one. She was a waitress. "She's not a waitress, you idiot!" Bianca hissed, her voice shaking with rage and terror. She's, oh my God. Sawyer, what did you do?" I invited her. "You invited her to humiliate her!" Bianca shrieked, her voice cracking. "You invited your boss, the owner of the company, to her own party. To pity her?" Bianca looked at him, her eyes wide with dawning horror. Not for him, but for herself. Her future as a CEO's wife just evaporated. She was, instead, the fiancée of the company's biggest fool. "You're an idiot!" She spat, her face contorted in a mask of pure contempt. "A complete and utter idiot!" She turned and stalked away, pushing through the stunned crowd, leaving him utterly alone in the spotlight's afterglow. "It has been my distinct honor," Mr. Coleman said, his voice resonating with a gravity that hushed the final whispers in the ballroom, "to work with this individual, to see their sharp, incisive mind, and their deep commitment to the real values of this company. Tonight, our owner has decided it is time to step out of the shadows and take their rightful place." Sawyer's heart hammered against his ribs. He felt the heat of 1,000 gazes. This was it. He smoothed his lapel, his breath held, his eyes locked on the stairs. He could already feel the heavy weight of the CEO title settling on his shoulders. He gave Bianca's hand a final, triumphant squeeze. "Ladies and gentlemen," Coleman boomed. "Please welcome to the stage the sole proprietor, the new global CEO, and the visionary future of Apex Designs." Sawyer took one step forward. "Ms. Jeanette Marie Price." The name hung in the air, a physical, impossible thing. Sawyer's brain simply refused to compute it. He froze, his foot hovering over the floor. He heard a sound like 1,000 people sucking in their breath at once. Jeanette. He thought he had misheard. It had to be a mistake. A different Jeanette. A Jeanette Price, who was some distant, unknown cousin of the founder. It was a coincidence. It had to be. Then, the brilliant white spotlight didn't hit the stairs. It shot across the room, a searing beam that landed directly on the woman standing 10 feet away from him, the woman in the midnight blue suit, the woman he had called Simple, the woman he had just tried to give an $80 a bracelet, Jeanette. As if in a nightmare, the two giant screens on either side of the stage, which had shown the Apex 50 logo, flickered to life. They were now filled with a professional, powerful headshot of her. It was a photo he'd never seen. Her gaze was direct, intelligent, and utterly ruthless. Underneath it, in stark white letters, were the words, "Jeanette M. Price, CEO and owner, Apex Designs." Sawyer stopped breathing. The blood didn't just drain from his face. It felt as if it had been violently vacuumed from his entire body. The noise of the ballroom compressed into a high-pitched, deafening whine. He looked at her. Her calm, cold gaze met his across the small distance. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply held his gaze. And in that look, he saw the full, terrifying depth of his miscalculation. "J. M. Price," Bianca whispered, her voice a strangled gasp. Her perfectly manicured fingers were digging into his arm, her nails breaking the skin. "Jeanette Marie Price?" Sawyer couldn't speak. He just made a small, choking sound. Bianca tore her eyes from the jumbotron and looked at him. Her face was not confused. It was not shocked. It was a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. Not for Jeanette, for him. "You!" she hissed, her voice shaking with a venom he had never heard. "You idiot! Bianca! Wait! It's a mistake!" he stammered, his mind reeling, trying to find a narrative that made sense. "A mistake?" she spat. She looked from him to the woman on the screen and back to him. The dawning horror on her face was not for his plight, but for her own. Her future as a CEO's wife, the penthouse, the social dominance, it all evaporated in a single, humiliating puff of smoke. She wasn't engaged to the king. She was engaged to the court jester. "You invited her to humiliate her!" Bianca shrieked, her voice cracking, drawing the stares of those closest to them. "You invited your boss, the owner of the entire company, to her own party, to pity her. I didn't know," he pleaded. "That's what makes you an idiot, Sawyer," she cried. "A complete and utter fool." She ripped her arm from his grasp. "You are nothing," with a final look of contempt that burned him to his very soul. She turned and stalked away, her red dress a slash of crimson as she pushed through the stunned, whispering crowd. She didn't look back. She left him utterly alone, a solitary, trembling target in the middle of the room. A stunned, hesitant applause began, led by the board members at the front tables. It slowly grew, a wave of confusion and dawning realization. Jeanette, impassive, walked past him. Her heels clicked on the marble floor, each sound a hammer blow against his sanity. She ascended the steps, not as a guest, not as an ex-wife, but as a queen ascending her throne. She shook Coleman's hand and turned to the podium. She adjusted the microphone, and the small sound echoed like a gunshot. "Good evening," she said. Her voice was calm, clear, and amplified, filling every corner of the vast room. It was not the quiet, hesitant voice he remembered from the diner. This voice had iron in it. This voice had authority. My name is Jeanette Price, and as of tonight, I am the CEO of Apex Designs. For 2 years, I have been your silent partner. Her eyes scanned the room, seeming to land on every single face. I have been observing. Sawyer was paralyzed. He watched, horrified, as Philip, his colleague, slowly turned to look at him, his expression one of pure, unadulterated shock, mixed with a dawning, terrible understanding. I have observed a company with a brilliant legacy, Jane continued, a company my grandfather built with his bare hands. But I also observed a company that had begun to value image over integrity, a company that rewarded arrogance over results, a company that, in its comfort, had begun to rot from the inside. Every word was a physical blow. Sawyer could feel sweat on his palms, the bile rising in his throat. He was the rot. He was the arrogance. That era, she declared, her voice ringing with finality, is over. Effective immediately, Apex Designs is entering a new chapter, one of performance, transparency, and accountability. She smiled, a sharp, corporate smile that held no warmth. We will no longer tolerate bloat. We will no longer tolerate waste. And we will certainly no longer tolerate those who believe they are bigger than the company itself. The applause this time was thunderous. The board members, the real power players, were all standing, applauding her. His boss, his ex-wife. I know, she said, raising a hand to quiet them, that there are many rumors about our major projects. Let me be clear. Sawyer's heart stopped. No, she wouldn't. The Crescendo Tower project, she said, her voice cutting, is being terminated. We will not do business with partners we have misled. We will absorb the loss. We will apologize to our partners at North Star Holdings, who I see are here tonight, and we will rebuild that relationship based on truth. Across the room, the North Star rep, who had looked murderous, now looked intrigued. He stared at Jeanette, then nodded slowly at the stage. He saw a path forward. Sawyer saw a sheer cliff. My first act as CEO, Jane said, will be a full, top-to-bottom audit of every department. We will find the rot, and we will cut it out, starting tomorrow morning. Her eyes swept the crowd and landed, once more, on him. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your evening. She walked off the stage, not to a storm of congratulations. People were too stunned for that, but to a path clearing for her as if she were royalty. Sawyer couldn't move. He was trapped. People were staring at him. Not just staring. They were whispering, pointing. He saw the glint of phones being raised, recording his humiliation. He was the rot. He was the arrogance. He was the man who had just been, in the most public and surgical way possible, executed. And then, she was in front of him. Jeanette, flanked by Mr. Coleman and her assistant, Martin, who now held a slim leather portfolio. The whispers around them died. This was the main event. Sawyer, she said. Her voice was quiet again. Just for him. He couldn't speak. He just made a sound, a dry, choking gasp. Jane, I had no idea. That's the problem, she said, her eyes flat and cold. You never did. You never had any idea. You looked at me, and you saw a charity case, a failure. You saw someone you could pity. No, Jane, please, he begged, his voice breaking. This couldn't be real. It was a joke, a prank. Jane, we can fix this. His mind, in its desperation, grasped for the only narrative it knew. his own importance. "The Crescendo Project. I can fix it. We can run this company. Together. Like we used to talk about. You and me. The vision. It was our vision." He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into the expensive silk wool. "I can help you. You need me." The desperation in his voice was foul. Jeanette looked at his hand on her arm with such profound, withering disgust that he snatched it back as if he'd been burned. She laughed. It was not a sound he had ever heard from her. It was short, sharp, and utterly devoid of humor. "There is no we, Sawyer," she said. "There is me, the owner of this company, and there is you, a liability." What? "You told me I had no ambition," she said, shaking her head slowly. "No, Sawyer. You had no vision. You couldn't see past your own reflection. You couldn't see the woman who was paying your bills, getting her business degree at night, and planning an empire while you were practicing your signature." "Jane, please," he whispered, his body shaking. "Your arrogance," she said, her voice shifting, the CEO returning, "was not just an insult, it was a crime. You haven't just been arrogant. You've been committing fraud." She nodded at Martin. Martin, silent until now, stepped forward and opened the portfolio. He didn't turn it for Sawyer to see. He read from it, his voice clear and emotionless, a corporate executioner. "Sawyer Roth, on August 14th, you buried a default notice from North Star Holdings. On September 2nd, you filed a fraudulent progress report to the board, claiming 40% completion on a project that had not broken ground. On September 20th, 22nd, and October 4th, you expensed $12,400 in client dinners that were, in fact, personal expenses, including at Alinea for Miss Bianca Slade's birthday and at the aviary. No, Sawyer babbled, looking around wildly. "That was client relations. That was business." "It was theft," Jeanette stated, her voice like ice. "You're not a king, Sawyer. You're not a rainmaker. You're a con man. And your con just ran out." She looked past him, at the two uniformed security guards who had quietly appeared at the ballroom's side exit. "Mr. Roth," she said, her voice now formal, void of all personal history. "Your employment at Apex Designs is terminated, effective immediately. Your building access has been revoked. Your corporate accounts are frozen. Martin will supervise you as you collect your personal effects from your office. You have 10 minutes. After that, you will be escorted from the premises." The finality of it hit him. The job, the money, the life, it was all gone. "No," he said, the word a desperate gasp. No, Jane, please." He did the one thing he had left, the one pathetic, final act of a broken man. He fell to his knees. The entire ballroom, 1,000 guests, watched as the man who was supposed to be the next CEO collapsed at his ex-wife's feet. "I love you," he cried, the sound a ragged wail. Tears and snot streamed down his face. "I still love you. I made a mistake. I was an idiot. I see that now. Don't do this. Please." Jane looked down at the pathetic, broken man kneeling in the center of her ballroom, his hands clasped in supplication. The man who had called her small, the man who had tried to break her. There was no anger left. There was no hatred. There was no pity. There was just nothing. "You weren't an idiot because you left me," she said, her voice quiet but carrying in the dead silence. "You were an idiot because you thought I was worthless. But I was never worthless." She held his gaze for one last second. You just can't recognize value." She turned, her back straight, and walked away. Coleman and Martin on her flanks, she moved through the crowd, which parted for her like the sea. She didn't look back. Sawyer Roth was left alone on his knees, his sobs echoing in the vast, silent room, a spectacle of his own making. The silence that fell over the grand ballroom as Jeanette walked away was heavier than any sound. The music did not swell to cover the moment. The string quartet had simply stopped playing, their bows frozen, their eyes wide. Sawyer was still on his knees, a fixed, grotesque statue of humiliation. The spotlight had moved off him, but he was still the center of every stare, a black hole of disgrace. He heard a single, sharp sound, a laugh. He looked up. It was Bianca. She was standing 20 feet away, a glass of champagne in her hand. She was looking at him with an expression of pure, unadulterated contempt. She wasn't angry. She wasn't sad. She was amused. She had already processed her loss and was now simply marveling at his stupidity. "Well," she said, loud enough for those around her to hear, "he's certainly not CEO material, is he?" She turned, not in a flurry, but with a deliberate, cold grace, and walked over to a man by the bar, a man Sawyer recognized as a rival, a hedge fund manager he had always despised. Bianca tapped the man on the shoulder, and when he turned, she gave him a dazzling, predatory smile. She was already cutting her losses, her future secured before Sawyer's knees had even cracked the floor. That was the last he ever saw of her. The next he heard was the 48-hour later announcement in the society pages, severing their engagement and, in a single, brutal sentence, aligning herself with integrity and honesty. "Sir." Sawyer flinched. The 2 security guards Jeanette had summoned were now standing over him. They were not unkind, but their expressions were firm, their hands resting on their belts. "You need to come with us, sir." The word "sir" was a mockery. One guard took his arm, hauling him to his feet. He was a dead weight. The walk from the center of the ballroom to the side exit was the longest of his life. It was a gauntlet of whispers, of averted eyes, and, worst of all, of pity. The pity he had been so eager to heap on Jeanette was now drowning him. Martin, Jeanette's quiet, severe assistant, was waiting at the door. He didn't speak. He simply led the way up a service elevator into Sawyer's former office. His security pass was already deactivated. His nameplate was already gone. In 10 minutes, he was back in the service elevator, clutching a small cardboard box containing a framed photo, a coffee mug, and a meaningless top salesman trophy. He was escorted out the back door into a cold, wet Chicago alley, a sobbing, incoherent wreck. The professional fallout was just as swift and surgical. At 7 a.m. the next morning, Jeanette Price walked into the Apex Designs lobby. The office, usually humming by that time, was a tomb. Employees stood by their cubicles, unsure whether to sit, to work, or to flee. Jeanette called an all-hands meeting in the atrium. She stood on the central staircase, wearing the same power suit from the night before. "Good morning," she said, her voice carrying without a microphone. "Last night was a new beginning. My first act is one of transparency." She held up the audit report. "This document," she said, "details the lies, waste and fraud perpetrated by Mr. Roth. It also details the brave work of those who tried to stop him." She looked into the crowd and found a pale, terrified-looking Philip. "Philip," she called out, "please come up here." He looked as if he were being summoned for his own execution. He walked up the stairs, his legs shaking. "Philip," Jeanette said, "is the only person who filed accurate risk reports on the Crescendo project. He is the only person who had the integrity to tell the truth, even when he was ordered to bury it. Because of that, I am promoting him to Senior Vice President, and he will be heading a new, internal, integrity task force. His first job is to finish the audit. A different kind of shockwave went through the room. It wasn't fear. It was relief and respect. Jeanette's next move was to fly to New York. She didn't send a lawyer. She went herself. She sat down in the North Star Holdings boardroom, placed the audit on the table and said, "Gentlemen, my predecessor committed fraud. Here is the proof. Here is his termination notice. And here is my personal check for the funds he embezzled." They were stunned. For an hour, she didn't make excuses. She answered every question with brutal honesty. By the end of the meeting, the North Star CEO, who was ready to bankrupt her company, tore up the lawsuit. "Ms. Price," he said, "I've been in this business for 40 years. You're the first person from Apex I've ever trusted. Forget the old project. Let's talk about a new one." 3 months later, they signed a new, larger contract. It was the beginning of her legend. Sawyer, meanwhile, was learning the true meaning of the word fallout. He was unemployable. The word Roth became a verb in Chicago finance. Don't pull a Roth. He was a pariah. He lost the penthouse. The bank repossessed the car. His legal fees, as Apex pursued a civil suit to reclaim the embezzled funds, bankrupted him. 6 months after the gala, Philip was walking out of the Apex Tower. He was now a respected senior executive, on his way to a lunch meeting at a restaurant he once couldn't afford. A courier in an ill-fitting polo shirt, his face gaunt and aged, his hair thinning, rushed past him, carrying a package. The courier stopped, recognizing him. Their eyes met. It was Sawyer. Philip saw not a rival, but a hollowed-out shell. Sawyer's eyes, once so full of arrogance and fire, were now just haunted. He couldn't hold the gaze. He looked down at the pavement, his face burning with a shame so profound it was painful to watch. He clutched his package and scurried away, disappearing into the lunchtime crowd. Jeanette Price, on the other hand, flourished. She rebuilt Apex from the ground up, not with flash, but with steel. She was featured in Crane's Chicago Business for the fastest corporate turnaround of the decade. She was tough, she was fair, and she was brilliant. She never saw Sawyer again. She never had to. She had already given him his life sentence. He hadn't just lost his job or his fiancée. He had lost his past, his present, and his future, all in a single night. He was forced to live every single day with the agonizing, all-consuming regret that the woman he threw away for being too small was, in fact, the biggest person he had ever known. He wasn't an idiot because he left her. He was an idiot because he thought she was worthless. But she was never worthless. He just couldn't recognize value. And so, Sawyer's world collapsed, not from a single mistake, but from a deep-seated arrogance. He tried to humiliate the one person who held his entire life in her hands, and his regret is a prison of his own making. Jeanette proved that true power isn't about the noise you make or the spotlight you crave. It's about the quiet integrity you build when no one is watching. What did you think of Sawyer's karmic downfall? Was it justified? What would you have done if you were in Jeanette's shoes? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you love stories about justice, drama, and seeing arrogance get what it deserves, then you're in the right place. Please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see this, and most importantly, click subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss another story. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.